Okay, so now record is on. So let us start. We can begin with 3 half bows to the Buddha, with 3 bows. 1, 2, 3. And then we will do the verse of salutation to the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Okay, good morning, everybody. And today we will be resuming our reading of the Anguttara Nikaya, Book of Fours. And the first sutta in this group that we come to is number 95. But we have here 5 suttas which belong together. They form a kind of group. And I've given this the title, the general title of the welfare group. And the word welfare here is not referring to welfare as an economic policy, but the Pali word is hita, which means one's good, one's moral and spiritual well-being. Let me get a blank note. Yeah, so the Pali word is, key word is hita. And so we have, as I said, 5 suttas which fit together into this group. And I've reordered the sequence of suttas. It seems to me that they're not arranged the way they've come down in the Anguttara Nikaya is not in the most logical order. But before I come into the individual suttas, well, maybe we will take the first one, the one that I have numbered, taken as the first in principle is number 1. Okay, so this is called one's own welfare. And so the sutta enumerates 4 kinds of persons existing in the world. So what is the 4? The one who is practicing for his or her own welfare, but not for the welfare of others. One practicing for the welfare of others, but not for his own welfare. One who is practicing neither for his own welfare nor the welfare of others, and one who is practicing both for the welfare of his or her own welfare and for the welfare of others. And before I come into the actual content of these suttas, one thing that struck me as rather interesting is why, and this is sort of going back to look into the minds of the compilers of the suttas, why they put this group in the position where it is now. So that was the question that came into my mind. And then I could see that the reason this group follows the previous group is because even though the content is quite different, but they're constructed on a very similar pattern. So if we take the first sutta in that previous group, we see 4 kinds of persons found existing in the world. So here we have a person who gains serenity but not insight, one who gains insight but not serenity, one who gains neither serenity nor insight, and one who gains both serenity and insight. And then when we come to this group of suttas, we could see that the pattern, though the content is different, but the pattern is the same, in that we have A, but not B, B, but not A, not A, and not B, and both A and B. So it's an interesting kind of logical construction. I don't remember the symbols of my symbolic logic days, but you could easily represent this with symbolic logic. Was it A? Was that the symbol of negation? Yeah, I don't remember the symbols. Anyway, we could see the way the pattern is constructed. And so here we have one's own welfare, but not the welfare of others. Then B, the welfare of others, but not A, not one's own welfare. Then neither A nor B, neither one's own welfare nor the welfare of others. Then A and B, one's own welfare and the welfare of others. So this is the first sutta, the one that I label number one, just lays out the four alternatives. Then we come to the second sutta, what I designate as the second sutta in this group, which lays out let's say, an ascending sequence of evaluation. Let's call this an ascending sequence of positive evaluation, where one starts off from the one of least value and then ends in the one of highest value. So here we have some difference, a difference you could see in the order of terms. So the one who is practicing neither for his or her own welfare, nor for the welfare of others. Then second, and this will be interesting, one who is practicing for the welfare of others, but not for his or her own welfare. One who is practicing for the welfare, for his or her own welfare, but not for the welfare of others, and the one who is practicing for the welfare of both oneself and others. And so here one starts off with the one of least value and then ends in the one of most value. And it's the arrangement of the middle two alternatives that I would find particularly interesting. So the reason for the lowest value and the reason why one is assigned to the highest value are quite evident, but it's the arrangement of the middle two which can raise some interesting questions. Okay, the Buddha begins by illustrating the one of lowest value, of least value, with a simile. So he says, suppose there were a cremation brand. So this would be a log of wood that's used in performing a cremation ceremony. Since in ancient times, in the Buddha's time, bodies were mostly cremated rather than buried. And so one would take logs of wood, pieces of timber, and put them into a pile, they call a pyre, and then they would put the body on top of that pyre and then ignite the pyre, and then the wood would burn and the body would get cremated. So here, the timber that's used for the cremation is called the cremation brand. And suppose here it says blazing at both ends, but it might be that it's not blazing, but rather that the ends have been burnt in the fire, and so they're charred. They're not they're not on fire now, but they've been charred and burnt at both ends. And then they've been smeared with dung in the middle. And so this cremation brand could not be used as timber, either in the village or in the forest. And so then he says, the person who is practicing neither for his own welfare nor for the welfare of others, is just like that cremation brand. So because it's blazing or it's been burnt at both ends, so that's like being useless for one's own welfare. And because it's smeared with dung in the middle, it's not useful for the welfare of others. Okay, then we come to the second, and that is the person who is practicing for the welfare of others, but not for his or her own welfare, is superior. Ooh, it looks like there is a mistake here. Oh, I'm sorry. The person who is practicing for the welfare of others, but not for his or her own welfare, is the more excellent and sublime of the first two persons. So person number two is superior to person number one. But then person number three, the one practicing for his or her own welfare, but not for the welfare of others, is the more excellent and sublime of these three persons. So in other words, person number three, the person who's practicing for their own welfare, but not the welfare of others, is superior to the one who's practicing for the welfare of others, but not his or her own welfare. Doesn't this seem a little, in terms of our Western standard of ethics, maybe rooted in Christianity, doesn't this seem a bit like counterintuitive, since we think that one should sacrifice one's own good, one's own welfare for the welfare of others? But before we get into an exploration of this, we'll finish this sutta, and when we come to the next suttas in the series, then the meaning of this will become clear, and the reason why the sequence is laid out in this way will become clear. Okay, then we come to the fourth alternative. So the person practicing for his or her own welfare and the welfare of others is, the Buddha doesn't say simply the best of these four persons and just stop there, but he uses a whole series of terms as though he wants to put special emphasis on the superiority of the fourth person over the other three. So he says the person practicing for their own welfare and the welfare of others is the foremost, the best, the preeminent, the supreme, and the finest of these four persons. So this is giving like a super strong recommendation and endorsement of this commitment to the dual welfare, the welfare of both one's own welfare and the welfare of others. And then this type of person, like the first one, is illustrated by a simile, but this is a positive simile. So here we have, from a cow comes milk, and then I'm not sure of all of the steps of this process of derivation, since I don't have experience on a farm preparing ghee. So an Indian farmer would have experience of this. So from milk comes something that is called curd. Then from curd comes butter. And usually in America or in Europe, they will stop with butter. But in India, there are certain derivatives from milk that are prized above butter. And what's prized above butter is one called ghee, which is sort of the refinement of the butter. And then from the ghee comes the superior derivative, which is called cream of ghee. Let's see if we can find the Indian terms here. Yeah, ghee in Pali is sapi. Does anybody know the contemporary Indian term for Hindi term for ghee?
In South India, we still call it ghee bante.
You call it ghee.
Yes.
And North, anybody know North Indian term?
Yeah, it's still ghee.
It's also called ghee in
Yep.
North. Okay, so all over India it's called ghee.
It's not
And
makhan.
what is that?
Makhan.
I think in Asia, in Indonesia,
Makhan might be butter. Yeah.
sapi.
Is the word sapi used?
In Indonesian and Malaysian.
In India, Indonesia, and Malaysia, sapi is used. Okay, and then from ghee comes something which is here called sapi manda. Like that is the, I just translated it as cream of ghee. It's sort of a superior derivative from ghee. And so within the Indian cuisine, the ghee and then the cream of ghee are ranked the highest. And so then the Buddha says, of these four persons, the one who's practicing both for his or her own welfare and for the welfare of others is the best, preeminent, and so forth. And the Pali words have really strong meaning. They are Uggo. Uggo is like the top, and Seto, the best. Pamoko is like the foremost. Uttamo, the ultimate, the highest, and Pavaro, like the most excellent. All of those words have such, they carry such a strong nuance of endorsement. Okay, so this is the ranking of the four persons. So I call this, I number this number 2. Then we want to fill out the content. What is meant by practicing for one's own welfare? What is meant by practicing for the welfare of others? And so I've taken the sequence, again, somewhat differently from that laid out in the sutta. Yeah, so here I put sutta number 3 in the sequence, and this is formulated by way of the Sikkhapada, the training rules. And so again, we have the 4 persons laid out. Then the question is raised, how is a person practicing for his or her own welfare, but not for the welfare of others? And then the answer is given. Some person abstains, on their own, they abstain from the destruction of life. They abstain from stealing, from taking what is not given. They abstain from sexual misconduct. They abstain from false speech. They abstain from the use of intoxicants, but they do not encourage others to abstain from these types of unwholesome action. So this person, because they are observing the 5 training rules, the 5 precepts, in that way, they're practicing for their own welfare. But because they don't encourage others, they don't explain to others what are the 5 precepts, they don't try to encourage others to observe the 5 precepts, then they're not practicing for the welfare of others. Okay, so this person will be laying the foundation for their own welfare, their own good, their own happiness. And we could, later we'll just explore the way in which observing the 5 precepts promotes one's own good. But let's just see the contrasting case here of the person who's practicing for the welfare of others, but not for their own welfare. So here we have a person who does not abstain from the destruction of life. So this person will kill other beings. Maybe they don't go killing human beings, but they enjoy hunting and fishing. Or if they have maybe mice coming into their house, they'll lay out the trap to kill the mice rather than use one of the non-harming mouse traps. So they will kill others. They themselves don't abstain from the destruction of life. So they'll take the life of other living beings, but they preach to others and encourage others to abstain from the destruction of life. They don't abstain from, actually I abbreviated this, so they don't abstain from stealing. Maybe they'll pilfer a little items here and there, but they encourage others to abstain from stealing. They might engage in sexual misconduct, having affairs, sexual affairs with people who are not their partners, people who are in other relationships, but they'll praise the blessings of remaining faithful to one's own partner. And they'll be disposed to tell lies, maybe even brazen lies, destructive lies, but they'll praise and encourage others to speak the truth. And they will indulge in the use of intoxicants, but they will encourage others to abstain from intoxicants. So that's the person practicing for the welfare of others, but not for his or her own welfare. Okay, then the person practicing neither for his own welfare nor for the welfare of others. So this is one who doesn't abstain, who doesn't observe the 5 precepts, and doesn't encourage others to observe the 5 precepts. And then the 4th person, the one who is most highly praised by the Buddha, the one practicing both for her own welfare and for the welfare of others, is the one who observes the 5 training rules themselves and encourages others, instructs others, enjoins others to observe the 5 training rules. Okay, so now we could see that the important contrast here, the interesting one that gives some food for thought, is why is person number 2, why is person number 1 ranked higher than person number 2? The one who observes the 5 precepts themselves but doesn't encourage others is ranked higher than the one who doesn't observe the 5 training rules but instructs others to observe them. Any ideas about this?
Yes, Bhante, you lead by example, and the other is that they're hypocrites.
Okay, that puts it quite well. We could say that the other is leading by examples, providing an example, whereas the one who is encouraging others but not encouraging themselves is hypocritical. Any other thoughts? And you could use the hand symbol if you want to speak. Okay, I see Robin Esposito.
Thank you, Bhante. You have some control over your own actions, but you don't really have any control over the actions of others.
I mean, that is true, but why should the one who observes themselves but not encourages others be ranked higher, better than the one who encourages others but doesn't observe themselves?
Perhaps because it's more efficient. If you yourself vow to do something and do it, it gets done. Whereas if you're just talking to other people,
Yeah.
there may not come any results of it.
Okay, so let us see. We'll just take a few more ideas. Brenda Walsh.
Well, if you're practicing the precepts and you're understanding the value of them, you're a far better teacher to others, are you not?
Okay. Yeah, basically that's very similar to what the first explanation I was offered. One is leading by example. Okay, Kenneth.
Yes, Bhante. I was thinking this is the example of the Buddha, where, as Siddhartha, he left his family and reached enlightenment first,
Yeah.
then helped his family and all the world. So
Yeah, but the Buddha, we could say, insofar as he served as an example, he would be the example, he would exemplify the fourth type of person.
right. But
Yeah.
but at least in the beginning, Buddha, at least in the beginning, right, Bhante, where he had to reach enlightenment first.
Yeah, okay. Actually, that gives a good idea that in order to, let us say, to be able to instruct others efficiently and effectively, one has to sort of establish a firm foundation for oneself in various stages of practice.
Yes, Bhante.
In fact, there's a verse that reminds me of a verse in the Dhammapada. Let me see if I could reach for it quickly without knocking things over. I think it's in the Pandita Bhagavad.
What?
Yeah, I can't find it right offhand. But I found another verse which maybe bears on this. And it says, let one not abandon one's own welfare for the sake of others, however great. Clearly understanding one's own welfare, one should be intent upon the good. And it might seem that this is sort of intuitively counter to, we might call the bodhisattva ideal of sacrificing one's own welfare for the good of others. But I don't think that's actually the case. What this verse means, is that one shouldn't abandon or give up one's own practice of, or undertaking of wholesome good practices, and then engage in unwholesome actions in order to satisfy the expectations of others, to fulfill the wishes of others. So if somebody says, if I'm, say, leading a disciplined life, And then a friend of mine or an associate of mine says, come, let us go to the bar and get some drinks. And then after that, we could go to a burlesque show. And that I shouldn't give up my commitment to observing wholesome practices in order to make my associate feel happy and content.
Ante, where did you see that? The last one you just mentioned.
Yeah, it's in the Dhammapada, verse number 166.
Thank you.
Now I just found the verse that I was originally looking for. It says, one should first establish oneself in what is proper or what is good. Then only should one, actually the translator added the word only, but literally it would be, then one should instruct others. In this way, the wise person will not be reproached, but I would actually retranslate that. In that way, the wise person will not be defiled or afflicted. Yeah, so in order to be able to instruct others, to guide others effectively, one has to establish oneself in wholesome or good practices. Otherwise, at the worst, one will be a hypocrite, and even if one doesn't fall into that extreme, one will rather be unstable or unsteady in one's commitment to the good if one tries to instruct others before one is well established oneself. In fact, I have to say that as a comment, maybe that is becoming a tendency, a trend in contemporary American Buddhism, maybe other forms of Buddhism. People start learning the Dhamma, maybe doing some meditation retreats for a year or two, and then they think, I'm ready to establish myself as a meditation teacher. Then the Facebook page comes up, and the website comes up, and the books get written, but they're not really well established in the practice themselves. Like in the traditional system that the Buddha laid down in the Vinaya, the person who becomes a novice monk has to be a novice till they reach the age of 20. And usually that will involve like 2 years as a novice. Then after you become a novice, after you become a newly ordained monk, a newly ordained bhikkhu, one is supposed to remain under the guidance of one's teacher for 5 years before one is ready to become independent. And then when you become independent, it's expected that you would still remain as a member of a community, sort of living and practicing under the supervision of senior monks for another 5 years till you're ready to start teaching yourself independently. But now the current trend is, if you have a gift for gab and you get a little success in your practice, then you go off and you start setting yourself up as a teacher. But in that way, it could be ultimately harmful to one's, maybe some can succeed in that way, people who have naturally maybe a strong, good roots in the Dhamma. And they're doing this not out of personal ambition, but because just they're quite successful in their practice. But it's just too easy, especially with the ego working in the background, for people to deceive themselves, delude themselves about the success of their practice, and then to rush to set themselves up as a teacher with a capital T. And when that happens, then the ego can start inducing one to manipulate others in order to fulfill one's own ambitions. And maybe this is why in Western Buddhism, there have been so many scandals have broken out about teachers who use their position either to exploit their students, either exploiting the students for sexual favors, or to exploit the students for their financial benefits, or else just to dominate the students and control them in order to reify in their minds the sense of their position as a teacher with the capital T. And so the ideal pattern is that which the Buddha himself followed, of striving first to advance oneself, to improve oneself, to get a firm foundation in the Dharma oneself, which doesn't mean that you have to become a fully enlightened Buddha or an Arhat before you could start teaching, but one should be well grounded in the Dharma before taking on a formal position of a teacher. But still, I would also add that this doesn't mean that one has to become an accomplished practitioner before one can encourage others, at least to observe the 5 precepts. In fact, I would say even somebody who's a relative newcomer to the Buddha Dharma and who recognizes the benefits of the 5 precepts can encourage and their friends, their relatives, to undertake the precepts themselves. And when the text speaks about what are the benefits that come from observing the 5 precepts, why should observing the 5 precepts, why should you say that they lead to one's own welfare? Any ideas about this? Okay, let's take Henry.
Good morning, Pandey. The way it is written, the way I interpret it is, for example, number 1, it says, one who is practicing for his own welfare. I read it as the word welfare means more like your benefit rather than welfare.
Yeah,
however,
yeah, as benefit, you could render it as benefit, yeah.
Yes, and I like to suggest the word, replacing it with the word conduct. In other words, one who is practicing his own conduct, because when you mention about the 5 precepts, you're talking about more of their own conduct rather than welfare or benefit. Do you follow what I'm saying?
I don't agree with that. The way of conduct, but let's say the word practice here is what suggests conduct, but it's whether it's practice or conduct, but that is the means, and the end here the word welfare is used, but we could also, I'd actually prefer the word benefit.
Yes, I think so too. I agree with you on that.
Put here.
Yeah, benefit rather than welfare.
Yeah, I think benefit is better. Unfortunately, the word welfare used to be a good word. Now, because of the political rhetoric in the United States, welfare has gotten negative nuances.
Right, I agree.
Unfortunately,
thank you very much.
Yeah,
Yes, yeah.
But what's intended by the word hita is welfare or benefit. Benefit is a good choice.
Yes, thank you.
But how does observing the 5 precepts, how does it lead to one's own benefit? Okay, Yolan.
Bhante, I'm thinking that what it might be talking about is what I've experienced, not only with my trying to help other people, is that the ego is involved, of course, and we want to help other people, and we don't recognize that we're doing it from a satisfying our own egotistical desire to be important.
Yeah.
And you want to be important to the person and to the people around you and seem as though you are a knowledgeable person.
Yeah.
But you haven't really practiced your own knowledge enough to have the ability to really give out.
Yeah.
So then you can only give out a certain amount.
Yeah, that's very true. Yeah, that is very true.
Is that what they're talking about?
Yeah, but what the question that I wanted to look at is what is the way in which observing the 5 training rules, the 5 precepts,
Yeah.
how does it lead to one's own welfare, one's own well-being?
Well, the more we practice the 5 precepts,
Yeah.
the more we let go of the ego, and the more we see what we are really doing. And then we have to challenge ourselves to be honest enough to see that it's all for our own grandiosity and
Yeah.
not for the real help of the person.
Yeah. Okay, let's just get a number of ideas here. Yurang, you want to?
Yes, I believe that if a person follows the training rules, a person will not, the training rules will protect us from creating unwholesome karma.
Yeah.
And that through that, we will gain the benefit.
Okay, so this is looking at it from the standpoint of karma.
But Bhante, the training rules, you can practice the training rules for a long time and still not, you have to apply the training rules to yourself mentally and spiritually and psychologically as well. Doesn't that make sense? I mean, you can pray and pray and pray with all the training rules and Amitabha stuff that you want, but until you take a look at yourself, which is what the training rules should take you to.
Yeah.
Are we getting too involved?
Yeah, I'm not hitting the nail on the head. The simple question is, how does observing the training rules conduce or lead to one's own welfare?
Well, I don't think that observing the training rules alone does that.
Okay, but the sutta says that it does. So let's see some ideas. First, let's get some ideas. Okay, Dayani, we have one idea here.
Yes, good morning, Bhante.
Yeah.
To me, is the benefit is go back to us. Like, for example, if we've been truthful in our conduct, in our speech, we certainly will gain trust from other people.
Okay.
Then if, let's say, we abstain from killing or hurting other beings, the surrounding, the people or beings, they feel safe with us.
Okay, that's very good point. Very, very good point.
Thank you, Bhante.
In fact, this, first of all, it brings out what I would say an important point from observing the 5 precepts, even though it says that you have the intention of practicing for one's own welfare, but not for the welfare of others. But when you observe the 5 precepts, even if you're not intending to benefit others, you are in fact benefiting others. Because when you abstain from destruction of life, then other living beings are safe in your presence. You're not harming or even taking the life of other beings or inflicting suffering upon them by harming them physically. When you undertake the precept not to steal, then you are protecting the belongings of others. So everybody else will be able to feel safe and secure with their belongings, that you'll not be depriving them of your belongings. When you observe the precept to abstain from sexual misconduct, then you are protecting your own relationship with your partner and protecting others who are involved in relationships from transgression from breaches of their relationship. When you speak the truth, abstain from falsehood, then you establish trust and harmony amongst others. Because when you speak falsehoods, then it creates division, distrust, conflict. And then abstaining from the use of liquor and other intoxicants, so much harm and destruction comes from the use of intoxicants. Okay, I think even though I see other hands raised, but I want to go through, maybe we'll take 1 or 2 more ideas. An Fong?
Bhante.
Yeah.
The way I understand is we observe the 5 precepts, so we have a peace of mind and we can use it to develop samadhi.
Okay, very good. So when you observe the precepts that leads to peace of mind, or let's say the kind of inner tranquility, then this will be a foundation for the next stage. I'm just trying to take people whose hands I haven't seen so often. Mark, author?
Yeah, I'll just I don't know if this has already been said really, but just kind of maybe add to it. So there's these benefits in the world, and there's these benefits in our relationships, but I guess ultimately as well.
Wait, I'm not getting this down very clearly. Go over it again.
I was just saying about the benefits in the world, the benefits in our relationships with others and for ourselves, but also perhaps pointing to the kind of transcendence in terms of kind of the renunciation that the training rules kind of
Okay.
Yes,
So
really.
you say that these training rules, sort of a starting point leading to greater renunciation. Okay, I'm going to move on now because I want to come to the next sutta in this group. So I'm sorry that I can't take all of the comments, but we want to cover material within the time that we have. Yeah, this was something that I also just wanted to show. Yeah, this was some of the reason why the Buddha includes refraining from the use of intoxicants amongst the 5 training rules. So he elaborates on this in the sutta in the Anguttara Nikaya, that indulging intoxicants leads to loss of wealth, quarrels, susceptibility to disease, evil reputation, shameless exposure of the body, and the weakening of one's intellectual faculties. So this is from the ancient Buddhist texts. Then, out of curiosity, I searched on the internet for some of the harms that come from, in the modern assessment, the harm that comes from the use of alcohol, at least in large quantities, and very similar to those enumerated by the Buddha. Unintentional injuries such as automobile crashes, falls, burns, drowning, then intentional injuries, gun violence, sexual assault, domestic violence, so much domestic violence connected with the use of alcohol. On-the-job injuries, family problems, broken relationships, then the different illnesses, high blood pressure, stroke, heart disease, liver disease, nerve damage, sexual problems, brain damage, and so on. Okay, I want to go on now to the next sutta. Okay, so this one I called number 3. Now we jump to number 4. So here the basic pattern is the same, except now the content is filled out somewhat differently. So what is meant by practicing for one's own welfare, but not for the welfare of others? So practicing for one's own welfare is practicing for the removal of one's own raga, dosa, moha, removing one's own lust or greed, hatred, aversion, anger, and delusion or ignorance. So the reason why I put this sutta after the one on the 5 precepts is because it seems to me that this represents a higher stage of training. So observing the 5 precepts in its sort of role within the Buddhist system of training, first in terms of its the benefits that come from observing the 5 precepts on their own. What they do is to create the wholesome karma, so they protect one from observing unwholesome karma, and more positively, they generate wholesome karma. But if you stop there just with observing the 5 precepts, then that wholesome karma will lead to a higher rebirth, or a good rebirth. Rebirth back into favorable circumstances in the human realm, or to a heavenly rebirth. But the 5 precepts can serve as the foundation for the next stages of training, the training in samadhi and the training in wisdom, or prajna, panya. And then the purpose of training in samadhi and wisdom is for liberation. Whoops. And liberation means what? From one angle, it's the destruction of lust, hate, and delusion. And so with sutta number 96, we go beyond just, we call this the mundane good of creating the conditions for a better rebirth. And here we are aiming for the ultimate good of the Buddha's teachings, which is the removal or eradication of greed, hate, and delusion. And so here one practices on one's own to remove lust, hate, and delusion. And so when we'll do this, there are different, of course, the Buddha teaches variety of methods to overcome lust, hate, and delusion. For example, to overcome especially sensual lust, lust is sensual craving. He teaches the meditation on the inherently unattractive nature of the body. To overcome hatred, the meditation on loving kindness and compassion. And then all of the unwholesome states, all of the kilesa or defilements are rooted in ignorance and delusion. And so to uproot all the defilements, one has to undertake the training in wisdom. And so basically we could say that what is sort of pointed to here by removing lust, hate, and delusion just to put it very simply, this will be the training in samatha and vipassana, tranquility and insight, or the training in samadhi and panya. Okay, so here we have the person training themselves, training in serenity and insight, samadhi and panya, in order to overcome lust, hate, and delusion. But even if one is not encouraging others explicitly through one's words, but by being very diligent in one's practice, one can, setting it an example that will inspire others to remove lust, hate, and delusion. But here we might have another person who goes about encouraging others to remove lust, hate, and delusion. Again, maybe this is the person who sets themselves up as the meditation teacher, giving instructions in samatha and vipassana, but they're not making the effort to overcome their own lust, hate, and delusion. So they're indulging their lust, giving vent to their hatred. They're embroiled and immersed in delusion. and yet they're trying to instruct others to overcome them. And so you could say that person is harming themselves, and probably, though it seems that they're working for the good of others, because they're not training their own mind, so they will probably be giving faulty instructions and then maybe trying to manipulate others and control others and dominate others. So even though they're trying to promote, ostensibly they're trying to promote the good of others, but in actual fact, they will be acting for the harm of others. Okay, then we have one practicing neither for his own welfare nor for the welfare of others. And then the ideal one is the person practicing both for his or her own welfare and for the welfare of others. So this doesn't have to be a person who's already accomplished the final goal, but somebody who is sincerely and diligently engaged in the training, engaged in the practice, working to overcome lust, hate, and delusion. And then they are encouraging others, perhaps giving instruction to others in how to overcome lust, hate, and delusion. Okay, so this is sutta number 96, the fourth sequence, sutta in the sequence. Then we can look at the fifth sutta, then I'll take questions. Okay, so this sutta is called quick-witted. So again, we have the same four types of persons, but here the explanation is given, somewhat differently. So the person practicing for his own welfare, but not for the welfare of others. So this is a person who is quick-witted. So it said that he's quick in attending to wholesome or good teachings, where they have a person who has a quick understanding, a keen understanding, and they're able to retain these teachings in mind. They can examine the meaning of the teachings, and then they practice in accordance with the teaching, with the Dhamma. But they're not a good speaker. They're not gifted with speech, and so they don't instruct, encourage, inspire, and gladden others. And here the Buddha uses, speaking in a monastic context, he says, they don't instruct, encourage, inspire, and gladden their fellow monks. So that is the person practicing for his own welfare, but not for the welfare of others. Yeah, in fact, I've known people like this who have very good understanding of the teachings, and they practice very well, very diligently, but they're just lack that natural gift of being a speaker. And so they don't go out and give public talks. And if they are invited to give a talk, sometimes they stumble over their words, so they feel embarrassed when giving talks. And so for that reason, they are not able to promote the well-being of others as effectively. Though sometimes now, because our conditions, our cultural conditions are somewhat different, what I found is that sometimes a person could have a good understanding, a good practice. They're not gifted as a speaker, but they do have a gift of writing. And so they can write very well on the Dhamma and explain the Dhamma very well in their literary works. In fact, one of my own teachers, the German monk Venerable Nyanaponika, had very, very good understanding of the Dhamma and good practice, experience and practice, but he was not a natural speaker, but he was very excellent writer. And so he was able to, and also an editor, and so he was able to benefit many, many people through his own writings and the works that he edited and published. Okay, then the one practicing for the welfare of others, but not his own welfare. So this is a little paradoxical. Somebody doesn't attend easily to the teachings, doesn't have a good understanding of them, but he's a good speaker, and so he instructs, encourages, inspires, and gladdens others. I don't know how one could instruct and inspire and gladden others in the Dhamma if one doesn't have a good understanding of the meaning oneself. The only way I could fill this case out is a person, they give Dhamma talks, but they don't really speak about the core of the Dhamma. Instead, they give entertaining talks. So they'll tell many stories, maybe tell jokes, give good examples that will delight others. And so they give rather worldly, mundane talks that attract a lot of people. But in their talks, they don't touch on the essential meanings, the essential principles and practice of the Dhamma. Okay, then we have the person practicing neither for their own welfare or the welfare of others, and then the person practicing both for their own welfare and for the welfare of others. Okay, so that takes us through this group of suttas. Now we could see whether there's any people have any further ideas or comments on this suttas we've covered. Henry, did you want to add something?
No, Bhante, I did not raise my hand, but I guess you might use the word charismatic.
That could be that could be a charismatic person.
Yes.
Yeah, when you finish, if you've raised your hand and then you finish saying what you had to say, then what you do is click, there's a button for removing the hand. Otherwise the hand will remain up, and then I think that you want to add something else.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's called lower hand. Okay, so Gita.
Yes, Bhante. Where would a Pacheco Buddha fall into this? Like usually they say Pacheco Buddhas don't really get involved in teaching the Dhamma. They're more silent Buddhas.
Okay,
So
actually, yeah. Okay, that's a good example. This is the Pacheco Buddha. It's called the Pacheco Buddha. In Pali, it's Pacheco
Buddha?
Pacheco Buddha. And then in Sanskrit, Pratyeka Buddha.
Pratyeka.
And it comes from prati, which has an individualizing sense, plus eka, which means one. So sometimes this is translated as solitary Buddha. Silent Buddha is not quite correct. And even solitary Buddha is not quite correct. So the Pacheco Buddha is a person who attains enlightenment on their own, through their own inherent wisdom, without relying on the teaching of a fully enlightened Buddha. And it's said that the Pacheco Buddhas arise only during periods, historical periods, when the teaching, the sasana of a fully enlightened Buddha is not available. So they discover the truth of liberation, the liberating truth, the truth of enlightenment. They discover it on their own. And then they ponder the question, should I try to share this truth with others? And then they come to the conclusion that the truth that they've realized is too deep, too difficult to convey. And so they don't try to share the truth of the Dhamma with others.
So Bhante, does that mean when the Dhamma age is ending and the Dhamma is no longer available to beings, then a Pacheco Buddha would discover the Dhamma, but only if you ask him will he share it? And he just, if it's not asked, he feels that it's too difficult and doesn't really make an effort like a Samma Sambuddha?
Yeah, it seems that they don't even try. there's not very much information in the text about the Pacheco Buddha, but it seems that they're not even asked about the truth that they've realized, but they're not completely silent and not completely solitary, at least according to the Pali commentaries, in that they do take on disciples and they train their disciples in morality, in the ethical practices, in the different disciplinary observances of a monastic, and they also train disciples in the samadhi practices, but they don't try to teach insight and to lead the disciples to realization. So probably in this fourfold scheme, we would say that the Pacheco Buddha is one who, with some reservations, we might say that they fit the first model, that they've practiced for their own welfare, but not for the welfare of others. But in fact, they do benefit others because, as I said, they do give instruction to others in the ethical practices and some of the meditative practices. And they serve as a field of merit for others. In fact, the Pacheco Buddha is supposed to be very, very powerful field of merit, because when they receive the offerings of others, then the people who make the offerings to them generate very, very high quality, powerful merit. And then the Pacheco Buddhas, they say, radiate loving kindness and compassion out upon the world. So even though they're not explicitly teaching others, but still they're sending the energy of their loving kindness and compassion out to the world, which can be benefiting others in secret ways, in non-manifest ways.
Thank you, Bhante.
Okay, Ravi. Ravi Karunaratne.
Yes, Bhante, Ravi. Just a quick thing, Bhante. I have heard some of your Dhamma talks regarding the disciplines, the 5 precepts, that it is part of the fundamental definition of or explanation of what the Dhamma is, Buddha Dhamma, Sabba Papa Sakaranam. That I have heard you mention that is covered under the precepts, and therefore it becomes fundamental part of the practice of the Dhamma to attain enlightenment.
Yeah.
I just want to. I didn't interrupt at that time, but I thought I'll sort of mention it before the end of the day.
Okay, you're wrong.
Yes, Bhante, the description you just gave about Pacheco Buddha, where can I find the text of this description?
Probably the fullest, in the Pali tradition, the most ample material on the Pacheco Buddha is in the commentary to the Sutta Nipata. I wonder, do you have that? I thought you had ordered it for the nuns in Taiwan.
I didn't look at the books themselves.
Okay.
But I do have Sutta Nipata that I know. I don't know if I have the commentary.
Well, if it's the edition that I published, the Wisdom Publications, it has the commentary. And so it's in the commentary to the Khagga Visana Sutta, the discourse on the rhinoceros horn. Because according to the Buddhist traditions, the discourse on the rhinoceros horns in the Sutta Nipata consists of many verses, I think about 50 verses, and it said that each one was spoken by a different Pacheco Buddha. And then the commentary gives a story about, first it begins with a longer track about the Pacheco Buddhas, and then it gives the background story to each of the verses, the kind of traditional story about each of the Pacheco Buddhas who spoke those verses.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah, within the Pali Sutta Pitaka itself, there's so little material about the Pacheco Buddha. There's just one sutta in the Majjhima Nikaya, which says almost nothing about them except giving the names of some Pacheco Buddhas from the past. But they're mentioned in the commentaries here and there, and particularly in the commentary to the discourse on the rhinoceros horn. Okay, Sud.
Thank you for taking my question, Bhante. So my question has to do with the 5 precepts and the 10 paramitas. So are the 10 paramitas then just an elaboration of the 5 precepts? How do 10 paramitas fit into what you said about following the 5 precepts, developing wisdom, and following along the path?
Yeah, no, the 5 precepts would fit only explicitly into one of the paramitas. This is the Sila Paramita, or the Sila Parami, the perfection of ethical conduct. Yeah, but the 10 paramitas in the Pali tradition are dana, that's generosity, then sila, moral conduct, nekama, renunciation, panya or prajna, wisdom, virya, energy, kanti, patience, satya, truthfulness, adhitana, determination, metta, loving kindness, and upeka, equanimity. Yeah, so the 5 precepts just fit into the second paramita. Okay, Vinyu.
Yes, good morning, Bhante. I have one question in regards to Arahant, and also just now you mentioned about the Pacheco Buddha. I'm always curious, what is the difference between the Pacheco Buddha and the Arahant? And it's not all the Arahant are Pacheco Buddha, right?
Yeah. In the most general sense, an Arahant is a person who has eradicated all defilements and gained liberation. And so in that sense, the Sammasambuddha, the perfectly enlightened Buddha, the Pacheco Buddha, and the disciples of the Buddha who achieved arhatship are all arhats. So that is arhat in the most general sense. But usually when the word arahant is used, it's used in the narrower sense to designate the disciples of the Buddha who achieve arhatship under the guidance of the Buddha. And so in that sense, the distinction between the Pacheco Buddha and an arahat is that the Pacheco Buddha achieves liberation, achieves arhatship without relying upon the teaching of a Buddha. He achieves liberation through his own inherent wisdom, without relying upon any other teaching. He discovers the path on his own. Whereas the Arahat, in the narrower sense, is a disciple of a Buddha. And so the Arahat depends upon the teaching of the Buddha, the path laid down by the Buddha to gain liberation. Does that make the distinction clear?
Yes, very clear now. Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Okay, at this point, I think we'll have to end for the day. And so let me bring up the file for the sharing of the merits. But I'll just recite the sharing of the merits on my own. But before that, let me just mention some of the upcoming activities. Okay, today is Saturday. Okay, so Sunday evening, we have group meditation over Zoom. This is led by Venerable Mangala. That is from 7 p.m. to 8 p.m. Sunday evenings. And then from 8 to 8:30 p.m., there's an additional period where Venerable Mangala will answer some questions based on the practical questions about the meditation. So that's Sunday evening. Wednesday evening, I conduct the group meditation, also from 7 to 8 p.m. And then this coming 3 days after the American Thanksgiving holiday, that's Friday, Saturday, Sunday. I think it's November 27th, 28th, 29th. I'll be leading over Zoom a 3-day meditation retreat based on the 4 protective meditations. The 4 protective meditations are Buddhanusati, that's recollection of the Buddha, Metta, loving kindness, Asubha, this is the meditation on the parts of the body, the 32 parts of the body, and Maranasati, the mindfulness of death. And you're welcome to join this meditation. I think all of the information for registering is available on the BAUS website. I saw on the sign-up sheet that people in Asia are signing up for this retreat, but I have to give the warning in advance that most of the sessions are going to take place during the daytime here in New York. So if you want to join from Asia, you'll be up almost all night, and then you'll have to sleep during the day if you want to sleep during the retreat. And even though some people I saw on the sign-up sheet have not had previous experience in meditation, normally I wouldn't recommend this retreat for people with no meditative experience. But if you've already signed up and you don't have previous meditation experience, don't drop out. Just give it a try and see how it works. But it's not going to be like the meditation on in and out breathing, where you're just focusing upon a present phenomena. But these are meditations that use the power of reflective thought in order to develop certain wholesome qualities. Okay, so let us now do the sharing of the merit. So I will recite the verses on my own. So we're going to share the merit with the devas, the protective deities, the nagas or dragon spirits, the bhutas, fierce spirits, and with all beings. Akasata Chabumata Deva Naga Mahidika Punyantam Anumoditva Chirang Rakantu Sasanam. Akasata Chabumata Deva Naga Mahidika Punyantam Anumoditva Chirang Rakantu Desanam. Akasata Chabumata Deva Naga Mahidika Punyantam Anumoditva Chirang Rakantu Mam Parang Bhavagupadaya Vichi Hetato Etantare Satakayupapanna Rupya Rupicha Sanya Sanyino Dukha Pamuchantu Pusantu Nibuting. And then we end with 3 half bows to the Buddha. 1, 2, 3.
Bow to Bhante.
Sadhu,
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Love you, Bhante.
Thank you, Bhante.
Thank you, Bhante.
Thank you,
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bhante.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Bhante.
Bhante.
Thank you, Bhante.
Be
Thank you,
safe and be
Bhante.
well,
Thank you,
Bhante.
Bhante.
All be well. Safe, Bhante.
Okay.
Thank you, Bhante. Bye,
Love you,
Bhante.
Bhante.
Bye, Bhante.
Bye, Bhante.
Okay, bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Bye, Bhante.
Be well.
Bhante.
Thank you, Bhante.
Oh, I'm so happy everyone is here.
Thank you, Bhante.
Okay, thank you. Okay, well,
Thank you.
Thank you, Bhante.
okay, bye-bye.